The Bible isn't just a collection of stories. It's a legend unfolding across time, a divine epic written in the fabric of history. This is a story of kings and prophets, of battles and miracles, of a God who walks among men, and a kingdom that never ends. We're about to walk through the most epic story ever told. And you're in it. We start with the era of Genesis. In the beginning, not just any beginning, but the very origin of time itself. God speaks and reality obeys. The book of Genesis opens with a light tearing through the void. Seas gather and the skies open. And the earth, once formless, now teems with life. Then the final touch, man and woman. Shaped by the hand of God, Adam and Eve, created to walk with him, to dwell within a world without strife or suffering, until the moment everything changed. Paradise is lost. Sin enters the world, and with it, the first steps down a long road of rebellion, redemption, and ultimately salvation. Generations pass, around 1,600 years. Putting that in perspective, that duration is longer than the fall of the Roman Empire to the invention of the internet. The world grows darker, and then a new name emerges, Noah. God warns him of a coming judgment, a great flood to cleanse the earth, a hard reset, if you will. Noah builds an ark, a massive vessel in the middle of the desert on dry land, mocked by all who see it until the rain comes. And humanity, along with everything else that they built, except for one family, is washed away. But this reset doesn't last. Pride returns. Instead of loving God, mankind builds a tower to reach the heavens. God scatters them, confusing their language. The world is fractured, and yet, amid the chaos, a single promise begins to take shape. As a side note, it was also around this time that the events in Job are taking place. And for reference, at this time, the pyramids of Egypt were being built. We enter the era of promise. Genesis continues around the 20th century BC, with God calling a man from a faraway land, Abraham, a nobody from nowhere, who would become the father of many nations. His descendants multiply. One of them, Joseph, is betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery and taken to Egypt. But God raises him up. He goes from a prison cell to a palace, saving the entire region from a famine. His father, Israel, and family move to Egypt to be with him, where they flourish until a new Pharaoh rises, and the people of Israel become slaves. We enter the era of Exodus. The book of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy follow. Around the 15th century BC, God raises up a deliverer, Moses, drawn from the waters of the Nile as a child, now stands before Pharaoh. Let my people go. Plagues strike the land to get the point across. The final judgment comes in the night. The firstborn of Egypt falls, but those marked by the blood of the Lamb are spared, a little foreshadowing there. They leave in haste. They reach the sea, and then the impossible. The waters part, and the Israelites walk through on dry land. Their enemies follow, only to be swallowed by the sea. That was a bad idea. In the wilderness, God forges his people. On Mount Sinai, he gives his law. But the people stray. 40 years of wandering follow. Moses leads them to the edge of the promised land, but he himself cannot enter. Joshua will take them across, entering the era of conquest. The books of Joshua, Judges, and Ruth follow. Joshua is a warrior and takes command. He sets out to conquer Canaan, modern-day Israel, that was promised to the Israelites. And with God's will, the River Jordan parts, and the fortress of Jericho is the first to fall. But as Joshua fades, the people lose their way. Judges rise to lead them. Deborah, Gideon, Samson, each a hero, each a failure for several hundred years. Enter the era of the crowns. Israel demands a king. God said, all right, as told in the books of Samuel and 1 Chronicles. First, you have Saul, first but flawed. Second, David. He's a giant slayer. He's a psalmist, and he's a king after God's own heart. And third, we have Solomon. He has wisdom beyond compare, but a heart divided, maybe a few too many wives. The books of Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon come from this era. And with Solomon's death, the kingdom itself divides. Again, for reference, far to the east, the Great Wall of China is first being built. Turmoil strikes as Israel drifts further from God. The kingdom splits, Israel to the north and Judah to the south. With this division, outside influences sense weakness and strike. Assyria destroys the northern kingdom. Several hundred years later, Babylon takes Judah and puts them into exile. The temples fall, Jerusalem burns. The books of 1 Kings, 2 Chronicles outline these events. The Holy Spirit speaks to the prophets, who warn of a coming judgment, crying to a people who will not listen. In the books of Isaiah, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Jeremiah, and Lamentations. The book of Ezekiel and Daniel capture the next 70 years of exile that follow. After 70 years, prophets continue speaking. In the books of Haggai and Zechariah, Persia takes over and lets the Jews return. See the book of Esther. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah tell the story of the Second Temple and Jerusalem's walls being rebuilt. The last prophet, Malachi, speaks, foretelling of an imminent coming of the Messiah. Then, silence. 400 years of no prophets. Until we enter the era of grace. The birth of Jesus, a child born in Bethlehem, changes history. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tell of Jesus' ministry, his healings, teaching, miracles, and him growing the disciples. The crucifixion and resurrection follow, the moment history has been waiting for. Sin paid for, death defeated, grace given. The early church and the spread of Christianity are highlighted in the book of Acts. Jesus ascended into heaven, his flame entrusted to his 12 disciples. They carried it beyond Judea, to Antioch's bustling streets, Ephesus's marble halls, and Rome's iron heart. Paul, once a persecutor with blood on his hands, became its torchbearer. His feet bruised by shipwrecks and scourges, his words unyielding. The early church is born and Christianity is spreading. Paul, the disciple, sends letters of encouragement to these new churches. In the books of James, Galatians, Thessalonians, Corinthians, Romans, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, Timothy, and Titus. Also, general letters are sent by other people in Hebrews, Peter, John, and Jude. About this time, Rome builds the Colosseum. Then we have the final prophecy in Revelation. The Bible may seem like ancient history, but in the grand sweep of time, it's closer than we think. And that's it, the entire biblical timeline. Thousands of years of history, dozens of prophets, the rise and fall of kingdoms, and the story of redemption itself. Everything in these books points to Jesus. Every prophecy, every story, every line. If you've ever wanted to understand the big picture, this is it. Let me know what part of the timeline was most compelling to you, and let me know what you'd like to explore more of in the future. Pray for me, and I for you. Keep looking up. If there's anything I breezed over too quickly, I'm going to be doing a deep dive of each book of the Bible in future videos.